Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. Audiobooks.com is the chief underwriter for Good Books Radio, which is produced by UTRGV Media Services for Rio Grande Valley Public Radio. And now, here's your host, Dr. W.F. Strong.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. I'm your host, Dr. W.F. Strong. I want to first thank our underwriter, Audiobooks.com, who make this particular program possible. If you'd like to hear this program again, you can hear it as a podcast on our Facebook page, Good Books Radio, or you can go to YouTube, Good Books Radio, and hear it there as well. We have an exciting book today, Change Agent by Daniel Suarez. Daniel Suarez is the author of the New York Times bestseller Freedom and Kill Decision and Influx. He is a former systems analyst, worked for Fortune 1000 companies, and he has a background in writing sci-fi thrillers. But in addition to his technological background, he also has a degree in English Lit, so an interesting combination. The book that we're going to talk about today is being praised widely in the publishing world. I like this one from the Wall Street Journal. It says, Biopunk has been waiting for its William Gibson to bring a whole new vision of the future, as Mr. Gibson did for cyberpunk, and Daniel Suarez has done it. Exhilarating, alarming, Daniel Suarez plays the two great thrills of sci-fi against each other, and not just for fun. He thinks it is coming, and he means it. Read it and wonder. So we're very happy to have Daniel Suarez with us this morning. And so do you like that, what the Wall Street Journal said?
I would be a fool not to love that. That review made me very pleased.
But what do you make of when they say that you're playing the two great thrills of sci-fi against each other? How so?
Well, I don't know. I suppose what they mean is, the conflict of fear of the future and anticipation of the future. I mean, I always think that technologies that radically transform society, which of course in many ways is what sci-fi is, they both thrill us and fill us with fear. Mm-hmm. And I think the more we explore that terrain ahead of us, the more comfortable we become in it. And that's what I try to do with my fiction. I try to popularize ideas about technologies that are quite complex and that maybe people don't have the time to fully research. And by making them, couching them in entertaining stories, I hopefully make that process enjoyable and intriguing.
Well, it is true when you watch science fiction movies from, way back, from, the 60s, et cetera, it's always the double-edged sword. Science saves us and endangers us simultaneously. Of course, most of those... Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Well, I think a lot of people, they look at some of the terrible things about modern technology, but maybe forget that the average human lifespan has almost doubled in the last 70 or 80 years. So, I think it's far outweighed by the benefits, but we do need to be mindful of the drawbacks.
Well, the worst rarely happens, We're always afraid when the Ebola crisis when we first saw it, I guess, 20 years ago, the fear was that it would become a pandemic and, spread across the world. And it got contained. And that wasn't really a science-created problem. It was a science-solved problem. And we always have these predictions that, the sky is falling, the world is going to end. But as you point out, science tilts in our favor generally.
It does. And look at nuclear power. We have had the ability to destroy the human race for over half a century, and we haven't yet. So,
yeah, but it's coming. One of the things I liked in your book, as I told you off air, is that good science fiction, I think, has to pull you in quickly to say, I want to live in this world a while. And yours did that in the opening chapter there. You have this couple that's sitting down with a genetic consultant, I guess, and he's telling them what kind of options they've got in making their embryo a better, stronger, smarter baby. and human being. And it took me back immediately to the idea, because the woman there is a little uncomfortable with this idea of playing with nature or playing God or whatever. And it reminded me of those Time covers back in the 60s when they first started playing around with test tube babies, and people were saying, "Oh my God, you can't do that. That's going against nature." And so the same argument is there.
Well, it certainly is, and I think it's heightened now because of the arrival of CRISPR and CRISPR technology. And I'm not sure how familiar your audience is with it, but it was developed in 2012. What it essentially was, it was a discovery of a natural immune process in bacteria. And by the way, CRISPR stands for clustered, regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats, which is probably the least helpful description of anything. But basically what it is a natural process where in bacteria it unzips its own DNA and searches it for the occurrence of a selected genetic sequence, let's say a previous viral infection. And then it can cut the DNA strand and insert something else, something healthy that should be there. Now, researchers thought, could we hijack that process and perhaps put in something we wanted to look for and we wanted to replace? And it turns out we can, even in other organisms. Now, just last month, Chinese researchers were able to edit out a genetic disorder from a viable human embryo. Now, when I saw this CRISPR, and I constantly search new technologies for trends, I honestly couldn't imagine anything more important and more relevant. That's why I wrote a whole book about it. I wanted to look ahead 30 years to see what type of world we might exist in, where human embryos are routinely edited to correct things like cystic fibrosis and Huntington's disease, and these are wholly positive things. But if we are already able to edit human embryos, what about the temptation for parents to say, modify the DAF2 gene and give their children 30 more years of healthy living, or if they want their child to be a sports star, to tweak the MEF2 gene to give them fast twitch muscles. The ethics really pile up very quickly.
Well, I like something that you bring up in this conversation in the first chapter, where the genetic consultant says to the wife who's uncomfortable with engineering her child or playing with the genetics, and he says to her, "But you've already done it. You chose a mate based on his genetics largely, and so you've already been playing with it in a different way." And so that's a good argument. And what is possible today? Can I go in and get eye color I want?
Well, see, that's the issue. In this story, in Change Agent, it follows an Interpol agent whose job it is to hunt down these black market embryo labs. Again, this occurs in the year 2045. But they are very profitable enterprises, and the genetic cartels, they target him with a compound that edits him.
Yes.
Now, the idea of editing an adult organism with 5 trillion cells as opposed to the 1 cell of a human embryo, that is a much, much more difficult problem, because, of course, then you have a living organism that tries to defend itself from edits. But all I'll say is this. 2 years ago, researchers at the University of Washington were able to modify squirrel monkeys. They injected a modified virus into the eyes of these monkeys that imbued them with the ability to see color. That was 2 years ago.
Wow.
So the idea of changing viruses, modifying them to transport desirable CRISPR edits into a living organism is not by any stretch of the imagination impossible. And I think we'll start seeing shades of that in the next couple of decades.
Well, another thing that you bring up in this fictionalized account is the idea that after these people have been edited as babies and they grow older, that in some ways they've leaped ahead of evolution and they're not quite prepared for the environment that is here now. And so they have weaknesses.
Well, yes, well, that's it. I mean, our understanding of genetics at this point is minimal, really. We can see what certain genes do, but we're not sure how interconnected they all are. Remember, all of these have been accreting over time. And as you mentioned, Darwinian selection determines whether a trait is passed on or not. Now, with CRISPR, it might be market forces, the desire to have a certain color eyes or hair or height and so forth. And that's a very different thing, being able to edit like that. It's completely out of the natural selection process. Now, the other thing is CRISPR edits are germline edits. And what that means is any changes you make are passed down to all future offspring. Now, that can be good, but also if unintended consequences and second-order effects happen from a change, let's say tweaking that fast-twitch muscle fiber also adds to other problems later on, very difficult to go back. Because, again, if you're starting to reverse and make other edits, you stack up all of the unintended consequences. And it's very difficult to get back to the original.
But as we sit here today, we know that we can at least tilt the odds in our favor. We can go in and say, I want to have a male child, and we can about 99% chance get a male child, right?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It goes right to the ethical dilemma. Selecting sex, of course, then you're selecting the entire thing. That's a single switch. Mm-hmm. It would then develop genetically from there naturally. Mm-hmm. But even there, you have the ethical question: is whether that's right. Some
Yes.
people would say it is. Some people would say it isn't.
But when the technology is there, it's going to be done somewhere.
Yes. And look at in China, for instance, in their one-child policy. Mm-hmm. Even that simple decision you just made there. How many outrages were happening because people wanted to have a son, mm-hmm. and so now you have a whole generation of Chinese men who will not have the opportunity to get married because there's mm-hmm. A disproportionate number of men. And there's a much reduced number of women.
And isn't that interesting? You talk about unintended consequences because the people wanted men because they were more valuable, and now they made women more valuable because because of scarcity.
Exactly. And that's without even genetic editing.
Right. Yes. Now, another thing you do here that I thought fascinating, because I've thought about it a lot lately with the robotics movement. We wonder what will happen to the middle class if McDonald's becomes mechanized. What happens to all those jobs that people rely upon? Yeah. And you create quite a dystopian view of that.
Well, I wonder if it's a dystopian view. I think it's just an extension of what's happening now. Mm-hmm. But we already see through automation, as you mentioned, the middle class is factually shrinking in size. If you look at the financial statistics, it is. And I don't think that process is going to abate. Mm-hmm. I think, a lot of Silicon Valley venture capitalists and other, people who are well informed, they are concerned about the issue because they envision a world a couple of decades from now where only 2 to 3% of the population might be actually needed to produce everything that civilization needs. And so what productive work do people do to occupy their time, but also give meaning to their lives? I think Kurt Vonnegut wrote about this way back, in 1954 in his book, Play or Piano, that envisioned a society where all work was automated. And it, again, caused all these unanticipated problems. Now, this is happening, so I don't think we can stop the process. It's what we do about it. And that is always the situation with the technology. When a time has come for a technology, you really can't stop it. You might be able to influence its direction, though.
Well, you have here, you have the protagonist discuss this, in which he says to himself, well, I'm lucky that I specialized because it gave me a profession in a world where everything else was falling apart. His own parents had a horrible end of life because they lost their purpose in life.
Yes, and they were well educated. Mm-hmm. But life is changing so fast, and the economy is changing so fast. It's difficult to know what to invest your educational years in.
Yeah.
So in my case, my protagonist was an analyst, a geolocation analyst who studied movements of people and data. Now, that's not something that you might leap to as a first choice. So I think the future will surprise a bunch of people, and those who are able to make informed decisions, I think, will benefit. Others, maybe not so much.
I have a son who's 16, and I told him, I said, well, maybe what you ought to learn to do is to work on robots. And he said, oh, no, they'll have robots building robots.
Well, then let's talk about this. How about synthetic biology? And this is an industry that is even now just coming into being. And the idea that we would program single-celled organisms like bacteria and algae and yeast to do useful work, I think that's going to be a huge industry in coming decades. Growing pharmaceuticals and growing car parts, even let's say fenders from chitin, which is the same material that mollusks use to make shell. I think it's going to be a very interesting time.
Well, the other thing that you talk about that we already see happening, I know it happens in biotech, is that a lot of the work that people would like to do here in biotech can't be done because the politics are so complicated around human tissue. And so that work is going on in mostly in Asian countries. And you point out in the book that in the future, Silicon Valley is second place because the Asian technology and research has taken over and left them behind.
Well, yeah, and really what I'm trying to get at there is embracing science. The desire to not have a certain outcome occur by just resisting any involvement in, let's say, technological development, again, can have the unintended consequence of then losing any control or any interest in how it unfolds. So in the case of synthetic biology or genetic editing, I don't think it is a viable option to simply say, no, we will never do that and never engage with it, because, again, tremendous advantage will be gained by those who do it. They'll take risks, but they also may have tremendous advantages from the result. So the rest of the world will not let that opportunity pass it by. And so then what do we do as America? I mean, do we let science advance beyond us and just say, no, we won't go any further? We are made of genetics. And I think mastery of DNA, comprehension of DNA is the building blocks for the next industrial revolution. What's called the fourth industrial revolution, which would include genetic editing and synthetic biology. Biofactoring instead of manufacturing. And it sounds controversial. I'll give you a good example. Cellular agriculture. The idea that instead of growing a whole cow, you only grow the steak freaks people out. And yet, we in the Amazon, 90% of land use in agriculture is dedicated to producing meat. And this is only growing, and it's devastating the ecosystem. If you did what I just described, and let's say you grew only the steak in a petri dish, and let's say it's genetically identical to the steak that you would eat otherwise, it would use 1% of the land. It would use 10% of the water. You might save the environment doing that. C4 photosynthesis rice is a great example. Right now, most rice strains use C3 photosynthesis, which is far less efficient. They were able to change it so that it used the same photosynthesis as, let's say, sugarcane. You could double the production of rice with half the water. A third of the planet relies on rice to eat. So when people say they're against GMOs, if more storms are happening, more droughts, is it moral to say we won't do that? So it's a really complex question. And of course, those who do deliver those results and save millions of lives will increasingly have more influence in the world. It's a big question.
And then we come to another major point in your novel, which is that global warming is real, and we see the outcomes in the future that you create.
Well, yeah. I mean, Exxon itself knew that global warming was real when they spent $1 billion raising their oil platforms. The Pentagon certainly is planning for it, and for the social disruption that may occur. So to me, evidence-based decision-making is key to belief in science. I mean, that is really where we need to start. And I certainly think it's America's strength. We didn't wish our way to the moon. We did the math. So.
And where will we be 50 years from now in terms of space?
Well, space actually, I think, is the very next big thing. What might drive us there is some of the alterations we're doing to the planet and its ecosystems. And again, in the pursuit of energy. Toxic processes are probably best situated in space, but people like Elon Musk, and NASA, and again, Chinese aerospace. India is also going to space. Russia, again, is investing in space. I think there will be competition pretty much in every field of human endeavor, and space is pretty much the rest of the universe. So there'll be a lot of competition there. Well,
I mean, do you think we will have a colony on Mars in 50 years?
Well, okay, now we'll get down to brass tacks. I look at Mars as an interesting question to me. I think it would be an interesting destination. I don't view a colony there as particularly viable.
Mm-hmm.
It has 60% of the gravity. That certainly makes it a very different living situation. Humans don't do well in reduced gravity over time, and we were evolved to live where we are. There's increased radiation there, so you'd have to live underground. And then a lot of people aren't aware that the surface in most latitudes is covered with perchlorates, and perchlorates are highly toxic to human beings.
Mm-hmm.
So tunneling through the dust might not be very healthy either, or when you're getting a spacesuit on and off. So that may be a challenging environment. I'd be hard-pressed to say why we wouldn't build our own habitats out there.
I guess our closest possible planet, somewhat like Earth, is so far away it would take us at current speeds something like 20,000 years to get there.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about the recently discovered exoplanet.
Yes.
Yeah, that is amazing to me. I don't think that's going to happen in our lifetimes or our grandchildren's lifetime, but it certainly would be a goal that would mesmerize us. I think in coming years what we are going to see is increased imagery on these, certainly more information. And those tantalizing prospects, I think, might do us a lot of good as a species, as a planet, to help us focus our activities and also give something to look forward to for us all.
Well, it may have to be what Sagan prophesied, so to speak, in his book Contact, where we were given the technology to get there.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite books, by the way. Early on, I was a big Sagan fan. As a child, I read Cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
The Demon Haunted World is a fascinating book.
I love that book, yes, absolutely.
About adherence to science.
Mm-hmm.
And he was inspirational, and I probably flatter myself in saying that I'm trying to do the same thing a lot in my work, which is popularizing complex scientific or technological concepts, making them accessible to people so that they can both enjoy them and the stories and the ideas, but also understand. And I'll tell you, I completely agree with what you said about what he was doing.
Well, Publishers Weekly said about you, it said the depth and sophistication of Suarez's dystopian world, not to mention his facility at making complex science intelligible to the non-expert, rivals anything Michael Crichton ever did. Another case of high praise.
Yeah, that one, wow, I took a little while to deal with that one. The only quibble I have with that is the dystopian world, because in many ways I look at these worlds and I don't think they're as dystopian. It pretty much is the Rorschach.
Well, actually, I
look at my world, and they have differing opinions about them.
Well, I like that because your world is, it has some dystopian features to it because the middle class has gone away. But it has great successes in other ways, and so it isn't a complete disaster. It isn't like The Walking Dead,
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think, why would the future be that much different from the present?
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that there would be really great things going on and really bad things going on at the same time. And that seems very believable.
Yeah, and I like that even the bandits in your novel understand algorithms. They know how to turn the technology to their favor. I like where
anything for advantage.
I like where the guys going through the countryside in a automated car, and then they know the car won't run over them, so they stand in front of it and make him pay them to go on.
Well, I had a friend in Silicon Valley who told me his favorite phrase was, "You show me your algorithm, and I'll show you how I change my behavior."
Well, what was the expression used in the book? Mathematics on parade?
Yes, and that was to describe automated vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, my protagonist, Kenneth Durand, was looking down from on high at the rush hour in Singapore circa 2045, and noticing how completely efficient it was, that it existed purely as a result of mathematics.
Mm-hmm. But that came from his father. His father had given him that phrase in his own response to a world that had left him behind, I guess. Although he understood
what
it.
I thought was interesting interesting about that and what drove that was that his father understood the process and yet couldn't stop it or participate in it.
Yes.
I think is a really common dilemma people have now.
Well, I am experiencing that a bit myself because I've been a professor for 40 years now, and I see everything going online, and I see the old paradigms getting destroyed, so to speak, and
Yes.
and it's frustrating because I don't know how to. I mean, I'm going along with everybody else. Okay, I'm going to go online, but I'm going to miss the beautiful lecture format that I was raised on and inspired by, and yet
Yes.
I have to leave those aesthetics behind and somehow create new ones.
It is interesting. I mean, so much that has existed for so long is changing so fast. And again, I'm a person who constantly monitors these things. And even for me, it's difficult to keep up.
Well, I tell you, you of course, as all good science fiction does, it asks more questions than it answers, but it provides your description was a prototype of the future.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, I like that. But I thank you so much for joining us today. It's a wonderful book, and I wish you the best of luck to it. I highly recommend it to our readers. Change Agent by Daniel Suarez. Do you have a final thought to leave us with?
Yes, that I'd like to say to people that I am actually excited about the future.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't want to blindly stumble into it. So I'd love to read my book and give it a try.
Well, it is. It's a wonderful book, and it pulls you right in from the beginning and holds you. So we will look forward to reading more from you in the future.
Thank you so much for having me.
Good luck on your radio tour.
Oh, I appreciate it, Bill. Thank you.
We've been talking with Daniel Suarez, author of Change Agent. I've been your host today for Good Books Radio, Dr. W.F. Strong signing off, and here's hoping that all your books are good reads.